All right, so let's talk a little bit about the 1988 amendment and beyond. The 1988 amendment, if you remember, is the last amendment to the Fair Housing. This is where we've added the 7 protected classes. So what you have are race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. Now, some states have added additional protected classes. Things like creed, protection for people with HIV, military status in some states. Washington State, sexual orientation have added. So states can add, they can become more restrictive. They can't be less than federal law. And that's true with anything across the board. I mean, if you go into OSHA or EPA, states can actually be more restrictive than the federal law, but they can't be any less restrictive. So some states add more. Sexual orientation, gender identity. Now, as far as you're concerned here in this room, we are once again all Indiana licensed. Indiana's fair housing law does not include any additional protected classes. So we don't. Some states do. The ones I just read you were like Washington State. Creed, HIV, military status, sexual orientation, gender identity. Those can be added, and you have to be careful if you go somewhere else. But Indiana, we do not have any other protected classes, all right? Now, how does the fair housing law apply to the banking industry? Obviously, since banking's tied to fair housing. Now, banking actually has what they call the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, or ECOA. Now, the ECOA has 8 protected classes, not 7. But, and unfortunately for the people at home, this is a visual trick. It is not 7 plus 1 to give you 8. It's actually 7. They subtracted 2 to give you 8 and added 3 more. So you've got race, color, religion, national origin, sex. They go away with familial status and they add marital status. They get rid of disability and they add age, and then they add the 8th one, which is the source of income. So if someone is getting support or help from the government, that is not allowed to be used inside of the application. So what you have are race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, and dependence on public assistance or source of income. Those are your 8 protected classes. Now, it seems to me that by taking away 2, it almost looks like that you can discriminate on them. You would think in their infinite wisdom they would have said, hey, we've got 7, we want these other 3, let's just make 10. But they didn't. They actually removed familial, add marital, they removed disability and added age, and then they added an 8th one, source of income. Okay? So those are the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, slightly different housing issues. All right? Now, what about insurance? Insurance basically is the same as the Fair Housing Act. To issue a person insurance, they cannot discriminate based on the 7 protected classes. They can't quote them differently or give them different benefits or aspects if they fall into one of those protected classes. So you can't say, well, because of this, your rate's going to be this, but because you're a blue man from Martian, your rate's going to be that. Can't do that, okay? Now, let's talk about a couple of other ones that I think are important, and that is the familial status discrimination. All right? It's okay for a landlord to single out children if the rules are aimed at protecting children's health and safety and they're reasonable. All right? So let me give you a good example. Let's say you own a property manager and you own an apartment complex, and the rules say no children between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. That is actually a discriminatory clause because you are ruling out a section. Now, if the rule said no children under 8 without the supervision of an adult, that is a different rule. All right, and those are looked at differently. One says no children ever unless discriminated against. Wrong. No children unless they're there with an adult. That is a health and safety to protect the child. The other one is just a convenience that would say, oh, we only want adults from 11 p.m. on, so no kids from those time frames. That is actually a discriminatory one, all right? The other is the big one that we kind of rely on now is the Safety Act of the 2 people per bedroom. You know, you could say, hey, sorry, there's a, for health and safety, I cannot put more than 2 people per bedroom in a house. Now, there are some subtle exemptions to that, but once again, I'm not going to go over specifically, you know, if it's a big house or there's plenty of adequate living area, it's potentially could be discriminatory as well. But basically, you know, if you've got a single mother with 6 kids and you've got a 2-bedroom house, you could say, sorry, I can't rent to you because you have too many children, and I'm trying to protect the children from not putting 3 or 4 kids in one room. That's a health and safety rule, okay? Now, when it comes to the disability or handicap discrimination, first of all, disability is defined as any physical or mental capability that limits one of the major life activities. This can include any kind of everyday activity such as eating, sleeping, seeing, hearing, walking. An individual undergoing treatment for a drug or alcohol addiction may qualify as well. Here's one. Even if the individual doesn't currently have an actual disability, but has a history of a disability or perceived as having a qualifying disability, like arthritis, that may be a disability even though you can't really see it, okay? So you've got to be careful. Now, with disability, once again, there is kind of a quote, and I'm using finger quotes, of an out. And that out is an economic. For instance, if someone is in a wheelchair, and we've talked about this in class, but you don't have the money to build a ramp and put grab bars in the bathroom and lower the doorknobs, you could potentially say, I'm sorry, I can't rent you the house because economically I cannot afford to fix this. And if someone says, well, if that person then takes away that ability by saying something to the effect of, I'm willing to make the payments myself, then you can literally say, okay, you've taken that away from me, let's do that. So if they're willing to build a ramp that you couldn't afford to build, you cannot now say, oh, because of the handicap. Your one quote unquote out was economic. They've taken that away from you by saying they'll pay for it. Therefore, that is gone. Now, you do have the right to charge them more deposit because, in essence, there is more work to return the house to the original case that it was in. I want to take the ramp down. I want to take the grab bars off. I want to reset the doorknobs higher. And because of that, there's a potential for more cost to me at the end. So normally, the deposit's X, and now it's going to be 2X. Theoretically, if the person puts the house back the way they're supposed to, they get their deposit back anyway, so it becomes a wash. I had a guy once that came in, and he had a seeing eye dog, which, by the way, helping animals are not considered a pet. Cannot be charged as a pet, cannot charge more. They cannot be excluded. That is a helping medical device. I had a guy that was blind and had a seeing eye dog. And he came in and he started swinging the dog around. I'm like, what are you doing? He said, I'm just looking around. Don't laugh at that. That's wrong. All right. So that's the out for disability, is an economic one. Now, there are some guidelines for property managers for construction of new property since like 91, and we're going to go over those coming in the next section when we talk about property management specifically, and we're going to talk about some of the guidelines that now certain properties have to be certain things. There's also some issues that you've got to be careful with, because if a person is in a wheelchair and say the property is 4 units with no elevator, you cannot not show them an upper floor simply because you visually see that they're in a wheelchair and determine that, hey, this isn't going to be good for them, so I cannot show them. So it's almost like a double-edged sword that you can get caught in. You know, you want to say, yeah, I've got an apartment for rent, but it's upstairs. Do you want to go look at it? And if they say, no, I can't go upstairs, then okay, you did your deal. But you cannot not show them the one upstairs or offer to show them the one because you perceive they're in a wheelchair and can't make it, and you make that decision yourself. Now, what are some ways to reduce your exposure as a buyer's agent or a tenant or a property manager? Basically, you should always use words and phrases that convey the preference of one group or another. Never use those, okay? When in doubt, use words that describe features of the property, all right? So use near a 6-mile paved exercise trail through the woods rather than buyers who might want to use the future. Great for joggers, okay? So the one is a description of the property where the other is a description of the person. So once again, we're going to talk about some things that most of you seem to think might be illegal. That's really not. The one that I just told you is not illegal. Near a 6-mile paved exercise trail through the woods. That is not discriminatory to anybody in a handicap status. Why? They can still use it in their wheelchair, but it's describing the property. It's truly a 6-mile paved path, all right? As opposed to great for joggers. That is a completely different thing. That is a description of a person, all right? Avoid describing the dwelling or the area or the building with words that relate to any of the race, color, religion, national origin, familial status, any of those. So don't say like, this is a great Hispanic neighborhood, all right? That's a violation. Another one that I've seen is catchwords like exclusive or private or integrated conveys a preference for one group over another and sends signals about a community's makeup. You know, exclusive one is one that I have seen, and HUD has a problem with that word, okay? Avoid making references to well-known racial or religious landmarks nearby. Now, we're going to get into this one because there is some things that you guys probably think are illegal that are not. Whereas if you're using the title of a building, it's not illegal, but if you're using the type, so like near the Jewish synagogue would be a violation. But if you say it's around the corner from the First Baptist Church, that's the name of the building, okay? The Americans with Disabilities Act, it's really not a housing issue. It's 1990. But if you're a property manager, you're going to be dealing with this because there are 2 sections or 2 titles, and we talked about this a minute ago. One of the titles is Title 1, where the employer has to make reasonable modification to, or has to make reasonable accommodations, and we'll talk about what reasonable means, for their employees with a handicap. So they may have a lowered work desk, the bathroom right in there does not have grab bars on it, okay? Up until probably 2 years ago, for those of you that have been coming here a while, Jason, you were here years ago. Remember we used to come in that door? Now we come in this door. Does it look completely different? Yeah, this property was not ADA compliant up until about 2 years ago. When they sold it to the current owner, he's dumped probably $1 million by building this entryway out here that has the elevator and, you know, atrium and all that. Looks beautiful. But up until then, I literally had a guy that was running for mayor. If anybody knows Jim Sleeth, Jim's a good buddy of mine, who called me one day, scheduled class, called me and said, I'm sitting in the parking lot. I can't get down the stairs because Jim had had a stroke and one whole side was a problem. and he couldn't come down the stairs, and we had no elevator. So, he's like, hey, can I just get refunded the money? So I actually went out and talked to him, and we agreed that I'd start helping him down the stairs, and I helped him down the stairs that whole time because he wanted to come down here. So if you're in a property manager's position, you've got two that you have to worry about. Title I, and then Title III is access to public goods, which basically is what I was talking about with Jim. So one is for the employer making the employees reasonably accommodations, and the other is the access to public goods and services. This is the curb cuts that you see that are the ramp, parking spots so that people in wheelchairs can roll up onto the sidewalk. I owned a bar at one time, in the 1999, not 2000, and our sidewalk did not have a curb cut, and we had a complaint, justifiably so. And the landlord had sent a company out, and they took one section of the sidewalk and busted it up and re-poured it with a nice ramp and all of that. So that's what we're talking about. That would be Title III of the 8A. So for property managers in here, you got you three and you. You guys could be subject to fair housing because that's your job, and because you entertain both employees and potential clients in this office, you got ADA issues, specifically Title I and Title III of the ADA. All right? Let's take a small break. When we come back, we're going to talk about property management specifically. All righty?